Rockets in the air, tanks and troops moving on the ground. The conflict between Israel and Palestinian militants in Gaza has been reignited and is growing. Yesterday, the Israeli Air Force carried out a blitz of attacks against targets across the region. This wave of airstrikes is part of Israel's renewed offensive against Hamas. That's the Palestinian militant group that controls Gaza. It started with Israel's assassination of a Hamas senior military commander. That killing was in response to days of rocket fire coming from Gaza. Hamas is fighting back. Already 350 rockets have been launched into Israel. Though many of those rockets are being intercepted by Israel's sophisticated missile defense system called the Iron Dome, some are getting through. An Israeli family of 3 died when a rocket hit their apartment building. Here you can see the Iron Dome system at work. It engaged while an Israeli reporter was doing a stand-up. Israeli tanks, armored personnel carriers, and troops are gathering on the Gaza border. It is a clear sign a ground offensive could be imminent. Joining us is Professor Alon Ben-Meir, Senior Fellow at NYU Center for Global Affairs. Professor, good morning.
Morning to you. How are you?
I'm well. Now, the situation is disturbing. Is this just the beginning? Could we see a full-scale ground offensive between Hamas and Israel?
It is absolutely conceivable that this can happen. But if I may, just want to correct one point. It did not start with Israeli killing of the Hamas commander, the military commander, but in fact it started with the Egyptian attacking an Israeli jeep that was patrolling the border and injured 4 Israeli soldiers. That's how the Israeli retaliated against this particular individual who has been the mastermind behind many, many terrorist activities against Israel. So the situation today is, of course, becoming worse by the moment because from the Hamas perspective, they do not want to allow Israel to have a free hand in continue to attack so many last 24 hours. So the situation is getting certainly worse.
So it's getting certainly worse. If we could backtrack to that reason, would you say that that is the major trigger for the explosion of violence right now, or are there other factors?
No, I really don't think so. I think there are at least 3-4 different other factors. First of all, there is very intense rivalry within Hamas leadership. Everyone you would like to be the so-called the prime minister, Ismail Haniyeh, is fighting for that. That's in one element. There's a tremendous conflict between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, who is trying now to achieve an observer state in the United Nations. That is another element. Then you have in Israel itself, Netanyahu is running for re-election comes January. He cannot afford to appear a weak leader, and especially because he's known to be the guy who is really taking care of Israel's national security. So you have all of these elements in the context also of the Syrian revulsions taking place. And so what you see, Israel also wanted to send a message to all this, to Syria, to Hezbollah, to Hamas, and to other elements, to Iran, that Israel has the means, the capacity, the ability to strike at will whenever it chooses to do so.
Now, it's sending that message, and it is very clear, but what about the U.S.? Do we still have the same sort of influence that would be useful at this moment in the Middle East?
I think the United States certainly has influence over Israel. But this is one of the reasons President Obama called the President of Egypt, President Morsi, and asked him to make every effort to try to use his influence over Hamas. So Morsi will have quite a bit of influence over Hamas. The United States, President Obama, certainly has influence over Israel, and both are going to try to temper the situation in order to prevent escalation. Because from what I'm understanding and talking to many Israelis throughout the day today, that Israel is in fact prepared to undertake major incursion into Gaza along the line of the 89, 88.
That is a pretty severe threat and a point that many people don't want to get to. In particular, we point to Egypt. What specifically do you think the Egyptian president may be able to do, if anything?
He can exercise influence, as we said earlier, over Hamas. But the Egyptian situation is extremely uncomfortable for him. If he does not come to, let's say there is an Israeli incursion, if he does not come to the Palestinian aid, he is going to be criticized domestically for abandoning the brothers and sisters in Gaza. And if he does, it is conceivable that the Egyptian involvement could humiliate the Egyptian army, if there's any such an involvement. And the third, of course, element, does he really want to undermine the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. So all of this has to be taken into mix. If I can predict, I would say that there is, yes, a likelihood of major incursion, but it is possible to prevent it.
Looking forward, do you think that they can get to the peace table? Is that possible?
Not in the foreseeable future. It is possible perhaps between Israel and Fatah in the West Bank, but as long as Hamas continue to call for the destruction of Israel, and as long as they are not willing to abandon violence as a mean by which to achieve their political objective, that's not going to happen.
Thank you very much for clarifying that point. Professor Alon Ben-Meir, Senior Fellow at NYU Center for Global Affairs.
My pleasure.